So during my time in county jail, they had these water taps that would pump out 190-degree water. They were there so that inmates could make oatmeal or soup or coffee without a microwave or any other kitchen appliances. Well, sometimes when there were fights, you would see an inmate fill a cup with 190-degree water and a glob of Vaseline. Now, this was pretty smart because the Vaseline would act as an insulator for the heat and burn anything it came into contact with. So the inmates that were fighting would throw this on their opponents. Watching that shit will stick with me for life. Mainly the terrible screams that the men would make as the Vaseline stuck to their face or skin. They were almost always taken to the medical bay right after that, with third-degree burns on their faces and hands and chests all over. This was basically a no-fire napalm concoction. Pretty smart if you ask me. I worked in a maximum security prison for many years. What I never saw, thank heavens, was a guy who prostituted his colostomy bag out, opening it for other inmates to have intercourse with. I was told he died from one of the many infections he was treated for over the years as a direct result of this. The one thing I did see that I wouldn't mind unseeing was a man pleasuring himself with a Campbell's soup can on one occasion and a shampoo bottle a different time. Prison sure does make men lonely, that's damn straight. So I'm a corrections officer here. The worst part about jail is that all your friends want stories, but you eventually wind up becoming numb to all the shenanigans that go on. It's all just jail shit. We actually had this guy in Seg who would stick pencils up his dick hole on a regular basis. It's just what he liked to do, and it is illegal for us to deny him access to writing his lawyer. So every few days he would ask for a pencil and paper to write to his lawyer. Now, you know this motherfucker is just gonna stick the pencil up his dick, but what can you do? So you give it to him, ask for it back an hour later, and he just grins at you. And off to the hospital he went. Then there was a guy who got a hold of a latex glove, pissed in it, then threw it into a guy's face like a water balloon. The piss went all over the guy and the glove stuck to his face. Now that was actually kind of funny. So, years ago, I spent 2 weeks in county jail before being let out on probation. The first 2 days were spent in the tank, or the drunk tank. I'm not the biggest guy in the world, so I buddied up with the others. I ended up talking to a few guys who were in there. There was a guy there who was a train hopper and ended up getting caught by police. Saw a kid barred out of his mind, two drunks beating the living hell out of each other, a Marine Corps veteran who beat the living shit out of his son-in-law for hurting his daughter, etc. The one that stood out the most was this one kid, Chris, we'll call him, that was at the final destination. He was a quiet Hispanic kid. Tough looking, so during breakfast I got the balls to talk to him. Curiosity got the best of me as to why nobody ever fucked with him. He was actually a pretty cool dude. But turns out he was charged with capital murder and was sentenced to 40 years. He was sitting in county waiting to turn 18 so they could send him to the big house. The dude stabbed his stepdad 17 times in the chest with a steak knife after he witnessed him beating his mother. He traded his commissary and offered security in exchange for some of my pain meds I was taking at the time. I felt bad for the kid, doing hard time for protecting his own mother. Sometimes the system doesn't work for us. So I'm not a prisoner, but I helped a customer that was just released from prison. In my line of work, you frequently find out more about your customers than you'd actually like to. This guy was a big 6'4"ish and 300-pound guy, talking about the mistakes he made to wind up there and some of the horrible things he witnessed. Then he started to shake and says, You always think if it happens to you, you can fight them off. And then he just began to sob, reaffirming my decision not to commit crimes as long as I want my starfish to be export only. So I'm not a prisoner, but I work at a prison. I got called out to check on an inmate who was on a 1-1 suicide precaution. They were going through some major psychosis and they were chanting in their cell while laying on their back. So the guy proceeds to start itching at his face. Then, without warning, plucks out his right eye. We tried to get him to drop it, but he proceeded to plop it into his mouth, chew and swallow it. I never went to prison myself, but I had a friend who was falsely accused of robbery and was eventually cleared of all charges. Apparently, about a month in, he was in the courtyard with a couple of his buddies. His friends started to explain how there was this guy who had just arrived and how he had supposedly raped his daughter, 8 years old, on multiple occasions. Whilst in the courtyard, they spot this gang starting to attack the newcomer, a young, greasy guy. This was the same supposed child molester. Nothing terrible happened at first, besides kicking and beating, but that then quickly proceeded to him being scalped with a contraband razor. Even more terrifying, one of the gang members began to mutilate his genitals with the razor, calling him a child fucker and such. It took a solid 5 minutes for the guards to break up the crowd. To this day, I still wish he was making it up. So, obligatory, I'm not a prisoner, but in fact, an ex-jail nurse. I was the charge nurse for a very large and very busy county jail. I have so many crazy stories from the 10 months I worked there. One story that stands out was an inmate in the SHU, Segregation Housing Unit, snuck out of his cell and beat the shit out of another inmate in the same wing of the SHU. This beating was, bad. The aggressor was a very large man, 6'7" and well over 300 pounds. The person he beat up was a small guy, 5'9" or so. Basically, the guy had no chance at all. So they bring them both over to the infirmary to get checked out. The aggressor was actually checked out before he's moving to another wing of the SHU. I asked him, "What the hell, man? Why did you beat that guy up for?" He says to me, "I was trying to kill him. He's a fucking dirty kid toucher." The guy had no qualms about killing this guy. None. So yeah, it's true that pedophiles get the shit beat out of them or killed in jail/prison. I also had the weirdest inmate who was a legit albino guy, had mental health issues and kept trespassing on private property and kept getting arrested. His irises looked purple because they were so light blue you could see the blood of the retina. He used to lay in his own shit and piss and then masturbate and yell all night in the infirmary. There's some weird people and there's some bad people in jail. I'm not a prisoner myself, but when my mother was away in an all-female prison, she was roommates with a 20-plus-something-year-old who was serving a life for cooking her newborn baby and feeding it to her husband. There was also a time when they were doing a cooking class and 2 women who were fighting over the last of the sprinkles threw a pot of boiling oil on the other, giving her 3rd-degree burns on her face and practically melting her eyes out of her head. And this was all over simple sprinkles. Ex-correctional officer here, and boy, do I have some stories. Probably the craziest story was a guy that went absolute nuts after being raped and ended up beating his head on the bars. By the time we got there, you could actually see his skull. Another time, one inmate used a 20-pound dumbbell from the weight room to punch another guy. He broke his upper and lower jaw, his nose, knocked out about 6 or 7 teeth, and gave him a concussion that I think was actual brain damage. That one had a lot of blood, had wounds bleed a lot. Another time I had to restrain a guy in Seg who would cover himself in his feces mixed with shampoo. That one was fun. I saw another guy who had been scalped over a debt. Literally took off the top part of his scalp and you could see his skull. After corrections, I would go on to probation and was very selective about who I would choose to incarcerate. I would actually only end up incarcerating serious offenders for felony level offenses, not some stupid probation violation. I know how much hell prison can be. You are either an animal to get locked up or become one to survive. That being said, not everyone behind bars is a savage human being, and I also met some very good people there as well. People who had made actual, genuine, understandable mistakes and were just doing their time. Hey guys, it's Gotea here. I wanted to thank you so much for listening to this video and supporting the channel. If you aren't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to do that. I will be uploading videos every other day, as well as if you want to drop a like and comment just to let me know what kind of content you guys are looking for. If any of you have any stories you would like me to share, please do not hesitate to send them to me via my personal email linked in the description below, and I will be sure to include them in a future video. So, with all that said, thank you again very much, and I will see you mates in the next episode.